She was invisible, just another waitress in a uniform, pouring wine for people who wouldn't spend a single second looking her in the eye. But Esther wasn't just serving tables. She was hiding a past that she had buried deep to survive. When Matteo D'Angelo, the ruthless Italian billionaire known for his heart of stone, walked in with his impossible-to-please mother, the entire staff panicked. One mistake could cost them their jobs. But when a plate shattered and tensions exploded, Esther did the unthinkable. She didn't apologize in English. She spoke 5 words in a language she wasn't supposed to know. 5 words that froze the room, silenced the billionaire, and made his mother weep. What happened next wasn't just a romance. It was a war for dignity, love, and the truth. Rain hammered against the stained glass windows of L'Oradoro, one of Manhattan's most exclusive dining establishments. Inside, the air smelled of truffle oil, aged cognac, and the distinct, sharp scent of old money. For Esther Russo, the scent was suffocating. Esther tightened the sash of her black apron, wincing slightly as the coarse fabric dug into her waist. Her feet throbbed in her worn-out non-slip shoes, a dull ache that had become her constant companion after double shifts 6 days a week. She checked her reflection in the polished brass of the espresso machine. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe regulation bun, and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup. Brad, the floor manager, preferred his staff to look like blank canvases, indistinguishable, obedient, and easily replaced. Table 4 needs water. Table 7 wants the sommelier. And for God's sake, Esther, stop looking at your reflection. You aren't the artwork. Brad's voice was a hiss near her ear. He was a man of average height who wore suits that were slightly too tight, as if to physically squeeze an aura of authority out of his body. He despised Esther, mostly because she never flirted back, and partially because she was smarter than him, though she took great pains to hide it. "On it, Brad," Esther said, her voice low and steady. She grabbed a crystal pitcher of water, the condensation cooling her burning palms. Moving through the dining room was a choreographed dance. She weaved between mahogany tables and velvet chairs, dodging bus boys and arrogant patrons who gestured wildly with their forks. Esther had learned the art of invisibility young. If you didn't make a sound, if you didn't make eye contact, people forgot you were there. That was safer. She poured water for a couple, arguing quietly about a prenuptial agreement. She didn't blink. She didn't listen. She just poured. But her mind was miles away, drifting back to a sun-drenched terrace in Tuscany 20 years ago. She remembered the smell of wild rosemary and the rough texture of her nonna's hands, kneading dough. She remembered a life before the debt, before her father's gambling addiction shattered their family and dragged them back to the United States, leaving them with nothing but empty pockets and broken promises. "Esther!" The sharp whisper snapped her back to reality. It was Jenny, the only other waitress who treated her like a human being. Jenny was huddled by the point-of-sale terminal, her eyes wide with panic. "What is it?" Esther asked, placing the pitcher down on the service station. "The VIP list just updated," Jenny whispered, frantically tapping the screen. "You know the private dining room, the one reserved for the Roman? We just found out who it actually is." Esther shrugged, wiping a spot of water from the granite counter. "A politician? A movie star? It doesn't matter, Jen. They all tip the same. Badly." "No, it's Matteo D'Angelo," Jenny said, her voice dropping an octave. "The CEO of D'Angelo Shipping and D'Angelo Tech, the guy they call Il Ghiaccio, the ice." Esther paused. Even she knew the name. Matteo D'Angelo wasn't just rich. He was industrial royalty. He appeared in the financial papers every week, usually acquiring a competitor or ruthlessly streamlining a failing company. He was known for two things: his terrifying business acumen and his absolute privacy. And, Jenny added, looking like she might be sick, he's bringing Donna Sofia. Esther felt a chill that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. His mother? The matriarch, Jenny confirmed. Rumor has it she made a chef at Le Bernardin cry last month because the risotto was too emotional. Brad is freaking out. He's in the kitchen screaming at the line cooks right now. Esther looked toward the swinging kitchen doors. She could hear the muffled shouts of the chef. She felt a pang of sympathy for the kitchen crew, but she kept her face neutral. So? We do our jobs. We serve the food. We go home. Brad wants you to take the table, Jenny said, biting her lip. Esther froze. Me? Why? Tiffany usually takes the VIPs. She'd kill for a chance to flirt with a billionaire. Tiffany called in sick. She's at a concert in Jersey. And Brad says I shake too much when I'm nervous. He said, get the robot to do it. Esther doesn't have feelings to hurt. Esther felt the familiar sting of insult, but she pushed it down. Being called a robot was better than being fired. She needed this paycheck. Her father's dialysis treatments weren't covered by his meager insurance, and the collectors were calling the house phone again, leaving threatening voicemails that made her stomach turn. Fine, Esther said, smoothing her apron. I'll take them. It's just dinner. Just dinner, Jenny repeated, skeptically. That's like saying the Titanic just hit an ice cube. Good luck, Esther. Esther took a deep breath and walked toward the private dining room. She checked her reflection in the glass door one last time. Invisible, she told herself. Be invisible. She didn't know that tonight, being invisible would be the one thing she couldn't do. Matteo D'Angelo did not like New York in the winter. He found the cold dampness seeped into his bones, reminding him of things he preferred to forget. He sat in the back of his armored limousine, scrolling through emails on his tablet, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light. He was a striking man, with sharp, aristocratic features that looked like they had been carved from marble. His eyes were a dark, piercing brown, usually hidden behind an expression of utter boredom or intense focus. At 32, he had built an empire that rivaled the Medicis, but he had sacrificed almost everything else to do it. Matteo! A sharp voice cut through the silence of the cabin. Put the machine away. We are arriving. Matteo sighed, locking the screen and sliding the tablet into his leather briefcase. He turned to the woman sitting beside him. Donna Sofia D'Angelo was 70, but she carried herself with the posture of a ballerina and the authority of a general. She wore a black Chanel suit and a single strand of pearls that likely cost more than the restaurant they were about to enter. Her hair was silver and perfectly coiffed, her lips set in a perpetual line of judgment. "Mama, please," Matteo said, his voice deep and weary. "Try to enjoy tonight. This chef is highly recommended." "Recommended by Americans," Sophia scoffed, looking out the window at the rain-slicked streets. "They think putting cream in carbonara is gourmet. I am only here because you insisted I leave the villa." "I insisted because you were lonely," Matteo countered gently. "I was not lonely. I was peaceful. There is a difference." She adjusted her gloves. "And I want to talk about the merger. You are working too hard. You have no wife, no heirs. You are married to your ships." Matteo rubbed his temples. This was the same conversation they had been having for 5 years. "Not tonight, Mama. Please." The car glided to a halt in front of L'Oradoro. The driver, a large man named Rocco, opened the door with an umbrella ready. Matteo stepped out, buttoning his suit jacket, a bespoke piece from Milan that fit him like a second skin. He helped his mother out, shielding her from the rain as they hurried under the restaurant's awning. Brad was waiting for them at the entrance, practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Mr. D'Angelo! Signora D'Angelo!" Brad bowed a little too low, his smile looking painful. "Welcome to L'Oradoro. We are honored, truly honored. I have prepared the private sapphire room for you." Matteo gave a curt nod. "Thank you. We prefer a quiet evening." Of course. No interruptions. Right this way." Brad led them through the main dining room. Matteo felt the eyes of the other patrons on him. He was used to it. The whispers, the hungry stares, the phones surreptitiously raised to take photos. He ignored them all, focusing on the back of his mother's head as she marched forward, inspecting every table they passed with critical eyes. "Tablecloths are crooked," Sophia murmured in Italian, too low for Brad to hear. "And that waiter needs a haircut." Matteo suppressed a smile. "Be nice." They were ushered into the sapphire room, a secluded alcove separated by heavy velvet curtains and glass walls frosted for privacy. The table was set with pristine white linen, heavy silver cutlery, and a centerpiece of white orchids. Brad pulled out Sophia's chair with a flourish. "Your server will be with you momentarily. Her name is Esther. She is very efficient." "Efficient," Sophia repeated, testing the word like it might be poison. "We shall see." Brad bowed again and backed out of the room, sweating. Matteo sat opposite his mother and loosened his tie slightly. The room was quiet, the noise of the main restaurant muffled to a distant hum. "So," Sophia said, picking up the menu and holding it at arm's length. "Let us see what disasters they offer." A moment later the curtain parted. Esther entered. She moved differently than the other staff Matteo had seen. There was no hurried franticness in her step. She walked with a quiet grace, her back straight, her chin level. She placed 2 menus on the table and filled their water glasses without splashing a drop. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was soft, professional, and entirely devoid of the fawning tone Matteo was used to. "My name is Esther. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with some wine?" Matteo looked up. For the first time that evening, he actually looked at a person. She was beautiful, though clearly tired. Her skin was pale, emphasizing the dark circles under her eyes, but her bone structure was exquisite. Her eyes were a startling shade of amber, flecked with green. They met his for a split second, intelligent, guarded, and weary, before dropping respectfully to the table. "I will have a bottle of the Barolo," Matteo said, "the 2016. "Excellent choice, sir," Esther said. She turned to Sophia. "And for the signora?" Sophia didn't look up from the menu. "Tell me, girl, this risotto Milanese, do you use saffron threads or powder?" Esther paused. It was a test. "The kitchen uses threads, ma'am, imported from Iran." Sophia huffed. "And the broth? Is it boxed?" "It is house-made veal stock, simmered for 12 hours, Esther recited perfectly. Sophia looked up, narrowing her eyes. "We shall see. Bring the wine, and do not pour it until I see the cork." "Of course." Esther nodded and slipped out of the room. "She seems competent," Matteo noted, unfolding his napkin. "She seems American," Sophia retorted. "They act polite, but they have no soul in the service. It is all transactional." Matteo didn't argue. He watched the curtain, waiting for the amber-eyed waitress to return. He felt a strange curiosity, a prickle on the back of his neck. Usually, people trembled in front of his mother. Esther hadn't flinched. In the kitchen, Esther leaned against the counter for a brief second, exhaling shaky breath. "How is it going?" Brad demanded, lurking near the expo window. "Is the old witch happy?" "She's fine, Brad," Esther said, grabbing the bottle of Barolo. "Just particular." "Don't screw this up, Esther," Brad warned, pointing a finger at her face. "If they complain, it comes out of your paycheck, and I know you can't afford that." Esther's jaw tightened. She gripped the neck of the wine bottle. "I won't screw it up." She walked back to the sapphire room, composing her face into a mask of serenity. But as she entered, disaster struck. A busboy, rushing to clear a nearby table, swung the heavy velvet curtain open too hard, just as Esther was stepping through. The heavy fabric caught her arm. She stumbled. The bottle of Barolo, worth $600, slipped from her hand. Time seemed to slow down. Esther lunged, catching the bottle just inches from the floor, but in the process, her hip checked the side of the table, sending the crystal salt shaker flying into Sophia's lap. Salt spilled everywhere, on the pristine black Chanel suit, on the pearls. Silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. Esther froze, clutching the rescued wine bottle to her chest. She looked at Sophia. The older woman was staring at the salt on her lap with an expression of pure horror. Matteo stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Esther started, her throat dry. "I am so sorry. Let me—" "Do not touch me," Sophia snapped, standing up and brushing furiously at her skirt. "Incompetent! Clumsy! Is this what passes for service? You ruin my clothes." Brad burst into the room, having seen the commotion from the floor. "Oh my God! Signora D'Angelo, I am so sorry." He turned to Esther, his face purple with rage. "You idiot! Look what you've done!" "It was an accident," Esther said, her voice trembling slightly but her chin high. "The curtain—" "Silence!" Brad yelled. "Get out! You are fired! Get your things and get out of my restaurant right now!" Matteo watched the scene unfold. He saw the manager's aggression, the way he loomed over the waitress. He saw his mother's indignation. But mostly, he saw Esther. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She stood there, clutching the wine bottle, her face pale, her eyes burning with a mixture of shame and defiance. Brad grabbed Esther's arm to physically pull her away. "I said get out!" Esther jerked her arm back. "Don't touch me!" "You have no right to be here," Brad shouted. "You are trash! I knew I shouldn't have let a charity case serve real people." The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. Then Esther did something that stopped Matteo's heart. She turned to Sophia. She ignored Brad. She ignored Matteo. She looked directly at the angry matriarch, took a deep breath, and opened her mouth. "Signora, le chiedo umilmente perdono," Esther said. Her voice changed. It wasn't the flat American accent anymore. It was rich, melodic, and perfect. "Non era mia intenzione mancarle di rispetto. La mia mano ha fallito, ma il mio cuore è pieno di vergogna. Madame, I humbly ask for your forgiveness. It was not my intention to disrespect you. My hand failed, but my heart is full of shame." The room went dead silent. Sophia froze, her hand hovering over her salt-stained skirt. Her eyes went wide. She looked at Esther as if seeing a ghost. Esther continued, her voice gaining strength, the cadence unmistakably Tuscan. "Permettetemi di rimediare. Non per il mio lavoro, ma per l'onore dell'ospitalità. Allow me to remedy this. Not for my job, but for the honor of hospitality." Matteo stared. He had heard perfect Italian before. He was Italian after all. But this wasn't learned in a classroom. This was the Italian of the hearth, of the home. It was the dialect of the hills where he was born. "You," Sophia whispered, her anger evaporating into shock. "You speak—" "Who are you?" Matteo asked, his voice low and intense, stepping closer to her. Esther looked at him, and for the first time the mask slipped completely. "Just a waitress, sir. Just a waitress." The silence in the sapphire room was heavy. But it was no longer the silence of disaster. It was the silence of recognition. Brad stood with his mouth slightly open, his hand still reaching out to grab Esther's arm, though he had frozen mid-motion. He looked from the waitress to the billionaire matriarch, trying to compute what had just happened. He didn't speak Italian, but he knew the tone of deference, and he certainly recognized the shift in Sophia D'Angelo's posture. "Get out," Sophia said. Brad blinked, a nervous smile flickering onto his face. "Yes, exactly. Esther, get out immediately. I will." "Not her," Sophia snapped, her eyes flashing with a sharpness that could cut glass. She pointed a gloved finger at the manager. "You, get out. Your voice is giving me a migraine." Brad turned pale. "Mom?" "But she ruined your suit. She apologized with the grace of a queen, while you shouted like a fishmonger," Sophia said, smoothing the napkin over her lap. "Leave us. Now." Matteo sat back in his chair, his dark eyes fixed on Esther. He gave a slight nod to Brad, a silent command that brooked no argument. Brad swallowed hard, shot a venomous glare at Esther that promised retribution later, and backed out of the room, the heavy velvet curtains swaying in his wake. Esther stood alone before them. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She kept her eyes lowered, her hands clasped in front of her apron. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. Speaking Italian had been a mistake, a reflex born of panic and the desperate need to communicate sincerity. "Come closer," Sophia commanded, her voice softer now, stripped of its earlier imperiousness. Esther took a hesitant step forward. "Where did you learn that dialect?" Sophia asked, studying Esther's face as if looking for a map. "That is not textbook Italian. That is the accent of the hills south of Florence. That is the Val di Pesa." Esther felt a lump in her throat. "My grandmother, Signora. She raised me until I was 10. She was from San Cassiano." Sophia inhaled sharply. "San Cassiano. I spent my summers there as a girl." She looked at Matteo, her eyes glistening. "Matteo, do you hear it? The cadence? It sounds like home." Matteo looked at Esther. He wasn't looking at her uniform anymore. He was looking at the way she held herself, the quiet dignity that remained, even after being humiliated by her boss. "What is your name?" Matteo asked. "Esther Russo, sir." "Russo," Matteo repeated. It was a common name, but on her it sounded significant. And why is a woman who speaks the language of poets serving water to ungrateful tourists in New York? Esther raised her chin slightly. "Because poetry doesn't pay the rent in Manhattan, Mr. D'Angelo, and the tourists tip better than the poets." Matteo's lips twitched. A spark of amusement lit up his cold eyes. It was the first time in years someone had spoken back to him with such dry wit. Sophia chuckled, a dry, rusty sound. "She has spirit. I like that. The manager, that little man, he is a fool." She gestured to the spilled salt and the wine bottle Esther was still holding. "Put the wine down, child, and pour it. I need a drink after that excitement." Esther moved efficiently. She opened the Barolo with steady hands, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. She poured a small amount for Sophia to taste. Sophia took a sip, closed her eyes, and nodded. "Acceptable. Pour for my son." As Esther poured wine into Matteo's glass, he watched her hands. They were rough, the skin dry from harsh soaps and sanitizers, the nails short and unpolished. They were the hands of a worker. Yet there was an elegance in her movements that fascinated him. "You mentioned your grandmother," Matteo said, testing her. "Is she here in New York?" Esther's face clouded over. A shadow passed behind her amber eyes. "She passed away, sir, 10 years ago." "I am sorry," Matteo said, and surprisingly, he meant it. And your parents? Sophia asked, ignoring the social boundaries that usually separated diner from server. My mother is gone, Esther said quietly. My father is ill. He lives with me. Ill? Sophia pressed. Kidney failure, Esther answered before she could stop herself. She stiffened. I apologize. I shouldn't burden you with my personal details. Let me bring the appetizers. Wait, Sophia said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a fresh handkerchief. She dabbed at the salt on her skirt. You said you have shame in your heart for the accident. I tell you, do not. Accidents happen. Rudeness is a choice. Your manager chose to be rude. You chose to be graceful. Thank you, Signora, Esther whispered. Now go, Sophia waved her hand. Bring the food, and do not let that little man back in here. Esther bowed and slipped through the curtains. As soon as the fabric closed behind her, she leaned against the wall of the corridor, her legs shaking uncontrollably. She had survived. Inside the room, Matteo swirled his wine. She's interesting. She's more than interesting, Matteo, Sophia said, her eyes sharp. She is struggling. Did you see her shoes? They are taped at the heel, and she smells of cheap soap, but she carries herself like a duchess. She is a waitress, Mama, Matteo said, though his mind was already turning gears. Don't get attached. We leave for Milan in 3 days. She speaks the old dialect, Sophia murmured, looking at the empty space where Esther had stood. Nobody speaks like that anymore. It reminds me of before the war, before the money, when we were just people. Matteo didn't reply. He took a sip of the Barolo. It was rich and complex, but for the first time, the wine wasn't the most intoxicating thing in the room. The rest of the service passed in a blur. Esther moved on autopilot, delivering the truffle risotto, which Sophia grudgingly admitted was edible, and the branzino. She avoided the kitchen as much as possible, using the side station to plate the bread and refill water. She knew Brad was waiting. She could feel his glare burning into her back every time she crossed the main floor. Brad was a petty tyrant who ruled his little kingdom of linen and silverware with an iron fist. He hated being undermined, especially by someone he considered beneath him. When the D'Angelos finally finished their espresso and stood to leave, Esther felt a wave of relief, so profound it nearly made her dizzy. Matteo signed the check. He didn't look at it. He stood up, helped his mother into her coat, and turned to Esther. Thank you, Esther, he said. His voice was low, vibrating in her chest. The service was exceptional. Thank you, sir, she said, keeping her eyes on the table. He placed a business card on the table, right next to the signed receipt. It was heavy, black cardstock with gold lettering. Matteo D'Angelo, CEO. If you ever tire of serving people who don't appreciate you, he said enigmatically, call that number. Then they were gone. Esther stared at the card. She wanted to take it, to hide it in her pocket like a talisman. But before she could reach for it, a hand slammed down on the table, snatching the card away. It was Brad. You think you're special? Brad sneered, ripping the card in half. You think because you babbled some foreign gibberish and tricked a confused old lady, you're suddenly part of the elite? Esther watched the pieces of the card flutter to the tablecloth. I did my job, Brad. They were happy. They were happy, Brad mocked. But I wasn't. You embarrassed me. You undermined my authority in front of the most important clients we have. I saved the situation after you started screaming. Esther shot back, her temper finally fraying. You are done, Brad hissed, leaning in close, his breath smelling of stale coffee. You are fired, for real this time. Pack your locker. If you're not out of the building in 10 minutes, I'm calling security to drag you out." "You can't do that," Esther said, panic rising. "Brad, please. My dad needs his meds next week. I need this week's tips." "Not my problem," Brad smirked. "Maybe you can pay for his meds with your grace. Get out." He turned and walked away, snapping his fingers at a busboy to clear the table. Esther stood there, the sounds of the restaurant fading into a dull roar. Fired. Again. This was the third job in 6 months. Not because she was bad at it, but because she refused to be treated like an object, and men like Brad didn't like women who said no. She walked to the locker room, her legs feeling like lead. She changed out of her uniform, pulling on her worn jeans and a thick grey sweater. She shoved her apron into the laundry bin. She didn't say goodbye to Jenny. She couldn't bear the pity. She walked out the back door into the alley. It was pouring rain. The dumpster smelled of rotting fish. The cold water soaked through her thin sweater instantly. Esther leaned her head against the brick wall and let out a sob she had been holding for hours. She was 26 years old. She was intelligent. She was capable. And she was completely, utterly broken. The debt collectors wanted $5,000 by Friday. She had $40 in her pocket. "Rough night?" The voice came from the shadows. Esther jumped, spinning around, her keys clutched between her knuckles as a makeshift weapon. A black umbrella emerged from the darkness. Holding it was the large driver, Rocco, and standing beneath it, leaning against the fender of a sleek, black Rolls-Royce Phantom, was Matteo D'Angelo. He wasn't wearing his coat. He was in his suit, the rain misting against the expensive fabric. He looked out of place in the grimy alley, like a panther in a landfill. "Mr. D'Angelo," Esther stammered, wiping the rain and tears from her face. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for you," Matteo said simply. "Why?" "You left 20 minutes ago." "I saw your manager's face as we left," Matteo said, stepping forward. The rain seemed to avoid him. "I know a man who has lost control when I see one. I figured your employment would not survive the night." Esther laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You're a psychic now?" "Yes, he fired me. Because I made him look bad. Are you happy? You got a show." "I am not happy," Matteo said, his face serious. "I am a businessman, Esther. I recognize value when I see it, and I recognize waste." "I'm not a stock you can buy," she snapped, stepping back. "I'm just a woman trying to go home to her sick father." "I know," Matteo said. "I had Rocco run a background check on you while we ate dessert." Esther froze. "You what? That's illegal. That's invasive?" "Yes. Necessary." "For me, yes." Matteo didn't apologize. "Esther Russo, father. Marco Russo, former accountant, currently unemployed due to severe diabetic nephropathy. Outstanding debts. $45,000 to various credit agencies and less reputable lenders." Esther felt naked. He knew everything. The shame burned hotter than the cold rain. "What do you want? To mock me? To offer me charity?" "I need a caretaker," Matteo said. The words hung in the rain. "What?" "My mother," Matteo clarified. "She is difficult. She fires nurses and companions weekly. She says they are boring, or they are fake, or they don't understand her." "She liked you. She respected you." Esther stared at him. "You want me to babysit your mother?" "I want you to be her companion, to live with us at the estate in Connecticut while we are in the States, and then travel with us to Milan next month." "Milan?" Esther shook her head. "I can't leave New York." "My father—" "Bring him," Matteo interrupted. "The estate has a guest cottage. I have private medical staff on retainer. Your father would receive the best care in the world. Better than whatever dialysis center you are currently driving him to." Esther's heart stopped. Private care, a cottage, It sounded like a fairy tale. It sounded too good to be true. "And the debt?" Esther asked, her voice trembling. "The 45,000? "Consider it a signing bonus," Matteo said, his expression unreadable. "If you last 6 months." "And if I don't?" "You will," Matteo said, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Because you are a fighter, Esther. I saw it in the dining room. You don't break." He opened the back door of the Rolls-Royce. The interior was warm, glowing with soft amber light. It looked like safety. It looked like a trap. "What do you say, Esther?" Matteo asked, extending a hand. "Do you want to go back to the apartment and wait for the debt collectors? Or do you want to step into the car?" Esther looked at the dirty alley. She thought of her father, coughing in his sleep, his skin grey. She thought of the fear she lived with every single day. She looked at Matteo's hand. It was large, strong, and open. She took a deep breath of the rainy air. "I'll get my father," she said. Matteo smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had just closed a deal. "Rocco will drive you," Matteo said. "Welcome to the family, Esther." Life at the D'Angelo estate in Connecticut, a sprawling mansion known as Villa Sereno, was a dream that felt constantly on the verge of turning into a nightmare. For 3 months, Esther lived in a world of silk sheets, polished marble, and silent servants. Her father, Marco, was thriving. The private medical team Matteo had hired was miraculous. Colour had returned to Marco's cheeks, and for the first time in years, he wasn't in pain. He spent his days in the greenhouse, tending to orchids, his laughter ringing out, a sound Esther hadn't heard since her mother died. For this, Esther owed Matteo D'Angelo her life. But her debt was paid in emotional currency. She was Sophia's constant shadow. They played cards, they argued about opera, and they cooked. The kitchen staff was initially horrified when Sophia and Esther hijacked the stoves to make papa al pomodoro, but the smell of roasted garlic and basil eventually won them over. Matteo, however, was a ghost. He was often in New York or flying to Tokyo and London. When he was home, he watched Esther with a brooding intensity that made her skin prickle. He never touched her. He rarely spoke to her outside of polite greetings. But his eyes followed her everywhere. The fragile peace shattered on a Tuesday in November. Matteo returned early from a trip to Zurich, and he wasn't alone. Hanging on his arm was Veronica Blair. Veronica was the daughter of a steel magnate, a woman bred for high society. She was tall, blonde, and possessed a smile that didn't reach her ice-blue eyes. The tabloids had been linking her to Matteo for years, calling them the power couple of the decade. "Esther," Sophia said stiffly, as the couple entered the drawing room. "This is Ms. Blair." "Charmed," Veronica said, looking Esther up and down as if she were a piece of misplaced furniture. "So this is the help you've been raving about, Sophia." "She's quite plain." Esther kept her face neutral. "Can I get you some tea, Miss Blair?" "Coffee, black." "And don't burn it," Veronica snapped, dropping her fur coat onto a chair for Esther to pick up. Over the next week, the house became a battlefield. Veronica was staying for the upcoming charity gala Matteo was hosting at the estate. She treated Esther not as a companion to Sophia, but as a personal servant. She would drop napkins on the floor just to watch Esther pick them up. She would criticize Esther's accent, her clothes, her hair. Matteo seemed blind to it. He was locked in meetings with Veronica's father, finalizing a merger. Esther told herself it didn't matter. She was there for the money, for her father. She wasn't there to be the lady of the house. But the night of the gala changed everything. The ballroom was filled with New York's elite. Esther was dressed in a simple, elegant navy dress Sophia had insisted on buying for her. She stood by the wall, translating for an Italian diplomat who was speaking with Sophia. "She looks like she belongs," a deep voice said beside her. Esther turned. Matteo was standing there, holding 2 flutes of champagne. He looked devastating in a tuxedo. He handed 1 glass to her. "I am working, sir," Esther said. "Take the drink, Esther," Matteo ordered softly. "You look beautiful tonight." The compliment hit her like a physical blow. She looked up at him, and the mask of the cold billionaire slipped. There was hunger in his eyes. "Matteo!" Veronica's shrill voice cut through the moment. She swept over, her silver gown shimmering. She glared at the champagne in Esther's hand. "Matteo, the senator is waiting for you. Why are you drinking with the staff?" "Esther is not staff," Matteo said, his voice dropping to a dangerous chill. "She is family." Veronica's face twisted in ugly rage. "Family? She is a waitress with a bankrupt father. I did my research, darling. She's a gold digger, and I won't let her ruin this merger." "Enough," Matteo said. "No, it's not enough," Veronica hissed. She stepped closer to Esther. "You think you can fool him with your little Italian phrases and your sad eyes? I know what you are." Veronica raised her hand, feigning a stumble, and accidentally splashed her entire glass of red wine onto Esther's dress. The crowd gasped. The dark stain spread across the navy silk instantly. "Oh, you clumsy girl!" Veronica cried out, flipping the script instantly. "Look what you made me do! You bumped into me!" Esther stood frozen, the cold wine soaking into her skin. She looked at Matteo, waiting for him to defend her. But Matteo was looking at his phone. His face had gone ashen white. He wasn't looking at the dress. He wasn't looking at Veronica. "Rocco!" Matteo shouted into his lapel microphone, ignoring the scene entirely. "Lock down the gates, now!" "What is it?" Sophia asked, stepping forward, sensing the shift in the air. Matteo looked at Esther, his eyes full of terror. "Your father, Marco, he's gone!" The wine stain was forgotten. The gala was dissolved into chaos as security swarmed the grounds. Esther felt her knees give way. "What do you mean, gone?" "The greenhouse," Matteo said, grabbing her shoulders to steady her. The guards found his wheelchair overturned. There was a note. He handed her a piece of crumpled paper. It wasn't written in ink. It was scrawled in marker. "The debt is due, Esther. The interest has compounded. Bring the billionaire or the old man dies. Midnight. The docks at Bridgeport. Come alone." It was signed with a symbol Esther knew too well. A butcher's cleaver. "Tony," she whispered. "Tony the butcher." "Who is he?" Matteo demanded. "The loan shark," Esther sobbed. "My father owed him 45,000. I thought we were safe here." "Veronica," Sophia said sharply. Everyone turned to the blonde socialite. Veronica looked pale, but defiant. "What?" Veronica stammered. "I didn't." "You did your research," Matteo growled, advancing on her. "Who did you call to get her background check? Who did you expose her location to?" Veronica shrank back. I just hired a private investigator. He said he had to ask around the old neighborhood to confirm her identity. I didn't know." "You led them right to us," Matteo said, his voice pure venom. "Get out of my house. If anything happens to Marco, I will destroy your father's company by morning. Do you understand me?" Veronica fled, sobbing. "Esther," Matteo said, turning back to her. "We are going to get him." "The note said come alone," Esther cried. "If they see you, if they see the police—" "I am not calling the police," Matteo said. He walked to a wall, safe hidden behind a painting, and punched in a code. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside was a stack of cash and a matte black Beretta pistol. Esther's eyes went wide. "Matteo?" I grew up in Italy during the kidnapping years, Matteo said grimly, checking the chamber of the gun. My family didn't just build ships, Esther. We protected them from pirates. I know how to handle trash like Tony. He turned to her. Do you trust me? Esther looked at the man who had given her everything, the man who was now ready to walk into fire for her father. Yes, she said. The drive to Bridgeport was a blur of rain and speed. Matteo drove the Ferrari himself, leaving Rocco to guard Sophia. Esther sat in the passenger seat, clutching her phone. They arrived at the desolate industrial docks at 11:55 p.m. The rain was torrential. Lightning flashed, illuminating the rusted skeletons of shipping cranes. Stay in the car, Matteo ordered. No, Esther said. They need to see me. If I'm not there, they'll hurt him. Matteo hesitated, then nodded. Stay behind me. If I say run, you run. They walked into the abandoned warehouse specified in the note. The air smelled of gasoline and rot. In the center of the room, under a flickering halogen light, sat Marco Russo. He was tied to a chair, bruised and terrified. Standing behind him was a mountain of a man, Tony the Butcher, and 3 armed thugs. Look at this, Tony laughed, his voice echoing. The waitress and the prince, isn't this romantic? Let him go, Tony, Esther shouted, stepping forward. You want the money? Matteo has it. Matteo threw a duffel bag onto the wet concrete floor. 100,000, double the debt. Take it and leave. Tony kicked the bag. 100, that's nice. But I see the news. I see who you are, Mr. D'Angelo. You're worth billions. Why should I settle for crumbs? Tony pulled a knife and held it to Marco's throat. I think the price just went up. 10 million. Wired to an offshore account, or the old man bleeds out right here. Matteo didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He stood perfectly still, his hands held out to his sides. You are making a mistake, Matteo said, calm, his voice level. Am I? Tony sneered. I have the knife. You have a tuxedo. What are you going to do, sue me? No, Matteo said. He switched to Italian. Rocco. Adesso. Rocco. Now. The skylight above them shattered. 2 figures rappelled down from the darkness with military precision. At the same moment, Matteo dropped to a crouch, drawing the Beretta from his waistband with a speed that blurred in the dim light. Bang! Bang! 2 of the thugs dropped, clutching their legs. Tony roared, raising the knife to strike Marco. No! Esther screamed. She didn't think. She grabbed a rusted metal pipe from the floor and swung it with all the strength of 20 years of repressed anger. The pipe connected with Tony's arm with a sickening crunch. The knife clattered to the floor. Tony howled in pain, stumbling back. Matteo was on him in a second. He kicked Tony's legs out from under him and pressed the barrel of the gun to the man's forehead. Give me a reason, Matteo whispered. Please. Give me one reason. Tony froze, hands up, trembling. The butcher was nothing more than a coward when faced with a true predator. Rocco, who had rappelled down, secured the other thugs. Esther fell to her knees beside her father, untying his ropes. Papa, she sobbed. Papa, are you okay? Marco was shaking, but he smiled weakly. I knew he was a good man. Matteo pistol-whipped Tony, knocking him unconscious. He stood up, adjusting his tuxedo jacket, though his breathing was heavy. He walked over to Esther and Marco. He holstered the gun and knelt beside them. He didn't look like a billionaire CEO. He looked like a warrior. Esther, he said, his voice rough. Are you hurt? She looked up at him, rain and tears mixing on her face. You speak Italian to your security team? Matteo let out a short, breathless laugh. It's a private frequency. Are you okay? I am now, she whispered, And then, in the middle of a dirty warehouse, with unconscious criminals groaning on the floor and police sirens finally wailing in the distance, Matteo D'Angelo kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was possessive, desperate, and full of a love that had been denied for too long. 3 years later. The sun over Tuscany was different than the sun in New York. It was warmer, heavier, smelling of grapes and dry earth. Esther stood on the terrace of the Villa D'Angelo, overlooking the rolling hills of the Chianti region. She wore a simple white sundress, and her hair was loose, blowing in the breeze. "Signora D'Angelo," a voice called out. Esther turned. It was Sophia, looking younger than she had in years, holding a chubby toddler in her arms. "Leo is refusing to eat his pasta," Sophia complained, though she was beaming. "He is stubborn, just like his father." Esther laughed, taking her son into her arms. Leo had Matteo's dark curls and Esther's amber eyes. "He's not stubborn, Nonna. He just has standards." Matteo walked onto the terrace. He had traded his suits for a linen shirt and trousers, his sleeves rolled up. He looked relaxed, the lines of stress erased from his face. He wrapped his arms around Esther and kissed her temple. "The harvest is looking good," he said, looking out at the vineyards. "Best year since '98. Better," Esther corrected him, "because this year the grapes are happy." It had been a long road. After the warehouse incident, the scandal had been massive. Veronica Blair had been disgraced, her family's stock plummeting. Tony the butcher was serving 20 years in a federal prison. Matteo had formally courted Esther for 6 months. He didn't buy her jewelry. He bought back her childhood home in Tuscany, the one her father had lost to gambling. He restored it, not as a mansion, but exactly as she remembered it. He proposed to her in the kitchen of that house, while she was covered in flour making bread. He had knelt on the terracotta tiles and said, in perfect Italian, "You stole my heart with 5 words. Keep it forever." Marco lived with them in the villa. He had made peace with his demons and spent his days teaching Leo how to distinguish between a weed and a flower. "What are you thinking about?" Matteo asked, sensing her quietness. Esther looked at the view, the golden light, the endless green, her family safe and whole. "I was thinking about the salt," she said. "The salt?" Matteo frowned. "The night I spilled the salt on your mother," Esther smiled. "I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything." Matteo tightened his hold on her. "You didn't lose anything. You just found your way home." Sophia sat down with a glass of wine, watching them. "Enough sentimentality. The pasta is getting cold, and if you ruin the meal, Esther, I will fire you." Esther laughed, the sound echoing across the valley. "You can't fire me, Sophia. I own half the vineyard." "Details," Sophia waved her hand. "Sit, eat, mangia." They sat at the long wooden table under the pergola. Esther poured the wine, a vintage from their own cellar. She looked at Matteo, at her son, at her father, and at the formidable woman who had become her second mother. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just a waitress. She was Esther D'Angelo, and she had spoken her truth in the language of her heart. And the world had finally listened. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange, Matteo raised his glass. "Alla famiglia," he said. "Alla famiglia," they echoed. And in the silence that followed, there was no fear, no debt, and no darkness, only the golden hour of a life well lived. And that is how a spilled salt shaker and a few words of Italian changed a life forever. It proves that dignity, no matter how hard you are pushed down, is the one thing nobody can take away from you unless you let them. Esther didn't just marry a billionaire, she saved herself first. If this story touched your heart, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that their luck can change in a single moment. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. What would you have done in the warehouse? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.